Welcome to Living Fullness, a podcast where you're invited to walk with two unusual friends through the ups and downs of the art of friendship. My name is Stina Constantine.
My name is Father Sean Burns, and together we explore what it takes to grow real, satisfying friendships, the joys and challenges we face along the way, and of course, becoming a good friend ourselves.
We hope by sharing our learning and experiences, this podcast will serve you in living your life to the full. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of Living Fullness, whether you're listening in through your earpiece, in your car or in your home. As always, you are most welcome.
We have a special guest with us today.
We do.
It's a pleasure to introduce to you Father Peter Thompson, who's the rector of Vianney College. He's my immediate superior, and he was also my rector when I was a student going through here at the seminary. Father, you've been rector for 18 years.
That's right,
and that's a very long period of time. And it's actually remarkable to have gone through your to have been your student and now to be working with you as a fellow formator. So, can you tell us about where did you come from? Like where did you grow up?
Right, I was born in a small town in New South Wales, country New South Wales, Central West, called Portland. I always have to add that's the New South Wales Portland, because there is a Victorian Portland.
Right.
I came from a very stable, very happy family. Mm-hmm. I went to the convent school in Portland for my primary education.
Yep.
And then I was sent to St Stanislaus College in Bathurst, about 30 k's away from Portland, and I did my secondary school. It was run by the Vincentian fathers, and it was there I think I received my vocation to become a priest, and in particular to become a Vincentian father. And so from there I entered straight into the Vincentian community in 1960.
Yeah, okay. And you've been a priest now for 53 years?
55.
Years? 55 years. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Could you tell us what does a day what does one of your days as seminary rector look like?
Okay. Well, like every priest, I start with prayer, and of course, as a rector, I am called to share by witness as well as by instruction the life of a priest with those young men who are training for that role. And so we make our prayer together. We start with the prayer of the church. We do half an hour of what we call mental prayer, and then we have Mass normally. There are some days where that routine has changed a bit, but that's the normal situation. The seminary on a normal day then moves into lectures. I double up as a lecturer at the present. It probably would have been better if I didn't. I would have more time to devote to my duties as rector, but I enjoy teaching. I've taught on and off for most of my life, and in particular I'm teaching Latin at the moment, which I enjoy.
Yeah, yep.
And so, yes, another thing we need to show the students is how to live together as a community. So we take our meals together, and in the afternoon, sometimes there are lectures, but more often it's the time for their study. They take a bit of recreation and do other things. Then there's the evening meal together, perhaps more study and a night prayer. So that's a normal day, I guess.
Yeah.
There are other areas of priestly formation which I haven't covered there, say the
Sure.
pastoral formation, and that to a large extent is not in my hands. That's sort of passed out to other members of the staff or to priests in their parishes. But that's something I have to look to and make sure at the right time that our students receive that adequate formation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I guess, I mean, you know the ins and outs. You're sort of here and you get to see how the seminary operates. For me, who doesn't, one of the questions that I have is the kinds of conversations that you might have with the students that are here. What would you, theme-wise, what would be some themes of really challenging conversations, but also really rewarding conversations that you might have here?
Okay. Well, there are different levels of conversation. I like to sit with the men in training, sit with them at lunchtime, and our conversation is more on a familiar level. I encourage them to talk about things that interest them, current affairs, what's going on amongst them, and so forth. I interview each student sometimes. Well, the ideal is once a term.
Okay.
And so I find out how they're getting on, how their studies are going, how they're kind of how that vision of the priesthood is growing in them, how they're getting on with others, any particular challenges they're facing. I inquire about their health. I ask about their family. So there's a whole range of things, but that's they can kind of. I am their rector, and from that point of view, the rector doesn't give spiritual direction. He keeps out of the interior forum. But at the same time, I see myself as a father to them, and so they do share with me concerns, and I let them choose that level that they want to share.
Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
sums it up.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of being a seminary rector?
I think the most rewarding part is the day of ordination of one of my students. And that comes, thankfully, pretty regularly.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your story, sort of paint a picture of a young Father Peter Thompson? Were you always practicing Catholic? You've already sort of spoken to us about where you were when you experienced the call to the priesthood, but life growing up, what was your seminary journey like? Yeah.
Seminary in the 1960s was quite different to Vianney College. And it was probably somewhat different. I trained as a Vincentian, and we were probably a little bit more monastic than St Patrick's College, Manly, which itself was somewhat monastic too. We rarely went out. It was a kind of an enclosed community. Pastoral training. Towards the end, after the Second Vatican Council, which finished in 1965, I was ordained at the beginning of 1967. So my last year, things began to change slightly, and my last year, thankfully, we did have some pastoral work, but that was slowly coming in. We concentrated on our academic studies, I guess. That was the main thing. Naturally, we lived in close contact with each other. We had to learn to live with each other. As Vincentians, of course, we had the additional aspect of training in our community life, our community spirit, and that aspect. So that basically perhaps describes my memories of those days.
Just for the sake of our listeners, when you say a Vincentian father, what do you mean?
Vincentian father, it's a community founded by St Vincent de Paul.
Mm-hmm.
He found, St Vincent died, St Vincent lived in the early 17th century. He was ordained, I think, around about 1600, and he died in 1660. He died a fairly old man. And we kind of think of St Vincent, the picture he's painted is the great saint of charity, and that's certainly true. There's another aspect to his life. He was essentially a priest, and the great poverty that he was aware of was the spiritual poverty in the society in which he lived, and particularly he saw it in the country areas where priests, very often parishes were without a priest, and the priests they did have were badly trained and formed and educated. So he kind of saw the two things going hand in hand. Firstly, to give material aid to the poor and the needy, but also to follow that up with spiritual assistance. And he saw the training of priests as an essential part of that.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Yeah.
It's interesting that aspect has almost been missed or forgotten in...
It is, even among ourselves. When I retire, there will be no Vincentian in this Australian province to my knowledge who was in the ministry of seminary training.
Yeah. When you took up the role, was there somebody else involved?
There were a few others. When I became a Vincentian, we were running 4 seminaries in Australia and New Zealand. Perth, Adelaide, Mosgiel in New Zealand, and our own internal seminary in Eastwood in Sydney.
Right.
And there was a tradition also that we supplied the spiritual director at St Patrick's College, Manly.
Okay, yeah. All right, and how did you wind up as rector?
That's something I'm not even sure. Interestingly, my ordination, I was more or less told that my future would be in seminaries. That our community had to train men to run the seminaries. They needed the theology degrees, and I was told to prepare to go to Rome to study moral theology, of all things. But in the meantime, they said, look, firstly, we'll give you a bit of parish experience. And I was appointed to Ashfield. And then, as in so many communities, there'd be a crisis in some particular community or work. And there was such a crisis in one of our colleges. The provincial said to me, I want to send you to Bendigo. It's only a temporary appointment. I stayed there for 8 years. And by that time, there was no kind of... they'd forgotten that I was ever destined to go. So after I finished my seminary, my college work, teaching at a secondary school, I then was appointed to parishes, and I spent perhaps the next 25 years in parish work and enjoyed it. It was a very rewarding experience, and I learnt a great deal, and I was able to bring that experience to my work as rector. I then actually was celebrating my 25 years jubilee, and I was given a sabbatical, and they said, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to go to Rome and do some study. So I did spend a year in Rome, and I got a Master of Arts in Theology at the Angelicum. I came back, and I was asked to go back into college work at St Stanislaus College. I did a bit of teaching, but my main job was the chaplain there. I was there for another 8 years, and then in 2001 I was put back into parish work. Only briefly. I was on loan to the Wollongong Diocese, and I served in Kiama at first and then in Mittagong. One morning at breakfast at Mittagong, I opened a letter from one of my colleagues. It was a colleague that used to write to me and ask me all kinds of difficult questions. So I put that aside. And I'll deal with that when I feel like it. Anyway, eventually I opened it, and he said, "Now look, the position of rector is falling vacant at because it was Father John Wilkinson who already was here at Wagga." He says the position of rector is falling vacant, and your name has been mentioned. Are you interested? So I couldn't believe it, but anyway, I thought there must be some kind of will of God to follow there. I expressed my interest and I said yes. The bishop got in touch with me, invited me down. I said, "Bishop, look, I've had no experience in seminaries since I left the seminary. I've spent so many years in teaching, other years in parish work. I don't know whether that's the man you want." He said, "That's just the man I want." So it was the appointment was for 2 years, to be reviewed after 2 years and maybe extended to 6 years. Mm-hmm. Well, 6 years have been extended somewhat.
To a brief 18-year stint.
But,
yeah.
Just couldn't bear to see you leave, obviously.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm not sure if there was anyone else to take my place. That might have been part of the reason.
Well, it's the role of rector. Certainly, you mentioned you were a father to the students, and that was my experience going through the seminary. So, what were some of the strengths that you brought to the role, and what were some of the new skills that you had to learn? What were some of the things that was kind of a learning curve for you when you came?
I had been not immediately, but a lot of my ministry had been in colleges with teenage secondary boys. I soon had to unlearn the way to deal with students. With seminarians are grown men, and there were times when I kind of reacted as I would have done in the secondary school, and that was a disaster. I had to kind of unlearn that, so that was something. Yes, I'm not sure whether I can sort of name just off the top of my head anything else.
Sure.
Certainly, I was conscious that I had to form and keep together a happy community. A seminary has to be a happy community, and that falls pretty much on the rector to make sure any tensions and things are dealt with quickly.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. A question that Stina and I were talking about is that, like, we grew up in a time where values had kind of already shifted. So we grew up in a time where Christendom Christianity did not have deep roots in Australia, and we've watched it then degenerate further. But there was never any deep roots from our childhood. Whereas I think for yourself, at least on the surface, it seemed as though Christianity or religion in general played an important role in social life, and you've watched that shift. You've you've ministered through that shift.
Mm.
Could you talk to us about what it was like to be in the fray during that time?
It wasn't pleasant. Yes, the parish I grew up in, it wasn't quite the same as the parish of St Mel's in John O'Brien's poetry.
Sure.
But there were traces of it. There was this Catholic, I suppose, tribal culture. We formed the parish community we knew everyone, and the parish priest was in charge, and of course the nuns, they were, in many ways the nuns were more important than the parish priest. But then came the Second Vatican Council. We kind of often blame the Second Vatican Council, but I think that's not the whole story. There was what is now known as the sexual revolution in 1968.
Yeah.
I often look back and think that in Australia anyway, the advent of television played a big role in changing the culture. Everyone got television, and that kind of let all kinds of questionable people into our family homes that weren't there before.
Yeah.
And that, I think, changed the culture tremendously, and the values. We became aware of a whole range of values and unvalues, if you like, that we didn't exist before. So yes, that proposed a number of challenges to us, and as I said, it was rather difficult to kind of adjust oneself to this new situation. I think everyone was in the same boat. I mean, I feel very sorry for the bishops in those days. They've come in for a lot of criticism, but I think they didn't quite know how to handle even what was coming from the Second Vatican Council. What was in the decrees and the documents very often was not what was coming from other, sometimes authoritative sources, and they didn't quite know who to listen to. And the same with the priests. We weren't quite sure who to believe and who to listen to.
And that must have been hard.
I see a turning point with the coming of John Paul II. That to me was a kind of a breath of fresh air. I mean, he didn't change everything overnight, but I think he gave direction and kind of showed how he didn't sort of go backwards, but I think he showed us how the Second Vatican Council should be interpreted. And Benedict XVI, of course, followed on in that path too.
Yes, brilliant.
Do you have a particular memory of John Paul II that you're fond of? Like anything that he said?
Well, I met him twice. I shook his hands
Oh.
twice, yes. And in my time in Rome, he was the Pope, and I often was present at the papal masses in St. Peter's. So I was close to him while he was celebrating Mass. But yes, there was, in that time there was a papal audience. The Australian bishops were making their ad limina visit, and I was invited to go along to that Mass. And so he always came out and met the congregation, people at his Mass afterwards, and I have that memory. About 10 years later, I was in Rome again. I forget the circumstances. I think I had two young lads from St Stanislaus College. I was teaching them Italian, and we were spending the summer the Australian summer in Rome. And we got a papal audience there. It was a much smaller group, and I concelebrated with John Paul II. There was only one other concelebrant, which was interesting because I had the experience of standing on John Paul's rite. And when it came the time to pray for the Pope in the Eucharistic prayer, that was my bit. So for John Paul, our Pope, and there was John Paul standing right alongside. And yes, he came out after that and met us all too. So they're very beautiful memories.
Yeah, yeah. So that is special. Yeah, yeah.
So on the Living Fullness podcast, we believe that
Look, one must daily make a conscious effort to come in contact with Christ. One's daily prayer is essential, and I would think the Eucharist for a priest, the Eucharist goes hand in hand with that. I mean, for a priest, Christ's main presence is there in the Eucharist. So the Eucharist plays a vital part in the spirituality of a priest.
Yeah, for sure. Father, you're getting ready for retirement, and
I'm not calling it retirement.
In a certain sense.
I'm after this podcast, I'm heading off to Urana with another load of books. I've been appointed administrator at Urana, a small parish, but it will give me. I'll certainly have more time to myself and to do things that I like. But I will also. I'm looking forward to once again being in direct touch with people in a parish and doing the things that I was ordained for.
What's the new challenge that you're looking forward to in terms of that new phase of life?
I'm not one to look for challenge. I guess my
Fair call.
the challenges come, but I that is the challenge, to be able to go back to the pastoral, the direct pastoral life. I mean, certainly a seminary rector has a pastoral role.
Yeah.
But work in a parish, getting to know the people, leading them in the liturgy, leading them in getting to know Christ. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, fantastic. How do you see your relationship continuing to grow, your relationship with Christ continuing to grow in that?
Well, a priest, the priest has to be a bridge in a certain sense between Christ and the people. So obviously, if I'm going to do my role as bringing Christ to the people, bringing the people to Christ, I have to continue to be in touch with Christ.
Yeah. Father, thank you for your time here in the podcast. I know that you've got a million things to do, including moving to Urana and running a seminary, but you've given us some great things to think about today. And it's fantastic being able to have my old rector, a colleague, and a friend here on the podcast. So thank you for your
Thank you,
presence.
Father, and thank you, Stina.
We now just have a little lightning round of questions, which the first answer that comes to mind, just shoot off the top of your head. So
I'll go first. Tea or coffee, huh?
Or tea.
he has a collection of teas. Most impressive collection of teas I've ever seen in my
Right.
life.
I've heard about this collection. It's like a cupboard full or something.
It's brilliant. Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Yeah.
Favourite movie or book?
I like Dickens. I mean, it depends what you want. For as a novel, a recreation, I like Dickens.
One day your life becomes a written biography. What would be the title?
Oh my God. Perhaps not the whole truth.
Nice. That's a good one.
What's one thing people misunderstand about you?
You'll have to ask the people.
Who was your first close friend, and how old were you at the time?
Well, I guess I had close friends in even in primary school. I remember the boy who lived down the back lane, just across the lane from me. We spent a lot of time together. We kind of he was from an interesting family, and I probably learnt a lot about life from him that I didn't learn in my family. But yes, I suppose that was he was just a classmate, and we got on well together.
Very good.
And the last question for you, Father, what inspires you?
Jesus Christ.
Good answer. Very good. Thank you again, Father, and we continue to pray for you as you finish up your role here and move into a new challenge. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Father, again, and thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our podcast listeners and viewers as well for joining us for another episode. Please keep Father Thompson in your prayers as he moves on into a new phase and into a new area of ministry. Also jump over to our Patreon page if you'd like to view a behind-the-scenes chat that we have with Father Thompson here. You can subscribe to the Patreon community by jumping over to the link in the description box. And as always, until next time, have a long prayers.
God bless.